gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Bird Calls. After a long off season, we are back for another season, and I am joined by beat writer for the New Orleans Pelicans on NOLA.com, the one and only Christian Clark. Christian, glad to talk to you, man. It's always a pleasure to talk hoops with you. How's your off season been?
It's been really nice, man. It's been good. I mean, it was kind of eventful in June, and I've been waiting for the Pelicans to do something, and it doesn't seem like they're going to do anything now. We're just going to go into the season with this roster. Been traveling a little bit these past few weeks and taking some personal time. It's been nice, but I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to get back going again.
Yeah, I think we all have been waiting for that second shoe kind of to drop for the Pelicans in the offseason after the DeJounte Murray trade. And we'll start right there because that's the biggest move that the Pelicans made in the offseason. We'll talk about their lack of moves in other areas in a little bit, but start with the DeJounte Murray deal. Certainly, you're adding a talented player. The Pelicans now have 4 20-point scorers from last year on their roster. He's 6'5", a former All-Star. Led the league in one of the top steals guys in the league, a former All NBA defender as well. On paper, it's a fantastic fit. But you've heard from folks in Atlanta, I'm sure, who have said DeJounte has not lived up to his reputation in the last few years. Let's start there with his potential fit with this team. And it does seem like DeJounte, from everything that he said and done, really feels kind of invigorated by this move to New Orleans and sees a plan for himself and the future with this franchise.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think first of all, this is definitely the most talented roster that DeJounte Murray has been a part of. I think, he got really good right at the end in San Antonio, and I think those are okay rosters. And then Atlanta, I know he's next to Trae Young, who is a talent, but it just didn't work. I mean, like, this is clearly the most talent he's played next to. He does seem invigorated by it. I think that was a really good word. Like, he's embracing this wholeheartedly. When the Josh Hart stuff happened, he was saying, like, not me. I'm excited to come to New Orleans, which I thought was pretty cool. I think the Pelicans felt like they had to do something to address the lack of creation when Zion Williamson is not been on the floor, because there have been multiple times now when Zion misses extended time, the bottom just falls out of the offense. When he missed the last half of 2 seasons ago, I think they were 26 in offense. That was like a sample size of 45 games or something like that. That first round series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, when they basically had everyone but Zion, statistically, like, the worst offensive rating from a playoff team in like 10 years or something like that. Like, there's these data points that just scream at you. Our offense is horrible when Zion is not there. So I think they looked at that and said, we got to do something here. And it is a weird roster to me. I mean, I like that they made the DeJounte move. I just thought, well, there'd be another move too.
Yeah. Let's talk about his defensive fit, because that's been another big thing, is pairing him with Herb Jones on the perimeter. And I think that it requires that both of them be elite together all season long because of their lack of height. And we'll talk about that. But because you don't have a rim protector, you still haven't solved that issue. And you are one of the shortest teams in the league now. You only have 3 players on this roster taller than 6'9". And the ones who are near 6'9", Jeremiah Robinson or Olis, these are not guys you're counting on to be main rotation players. So most of your very big guys are back into the rotation guys, except for maybe Yves Missi, who will get a good amount of minutes, I think, as a rookie, as they try to see if he can defend and do some things. But you're expecting now DeJounte Murray and Herb Jones on the perimeter to be all NBA level defenders on a night-to-night basis. I think that this is a little bit easier now. I will say this for DeJounte. When you have a Herb Jones who plays a lot like a free safety in the NFL, able to play against every position on the court, for DeJounte now, he doesn't necessarily have to lock in on the best perimeter defender on a night-to-night basis, but he can hone in on one guy maybe, and you could say, just stay with that guy, and the rest of us will work on rotations. Herb will cover up mistakes. But I think for DeJounte, his responsibilities now are lessened than what they were maybe in Atlanta, where he was the only, in a lot of cases, perimeter defender for that team.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, the majority of his minutes in Atlanta, he had to guard the other team's best perimeter player. And I think the majority of his minutes in New Orleans, he's going to have to guard the second best perimeter player, because Herb Jones has got that covered. I mean, Donovan Mitchell, throw Herb Jones at him. Trae Young, Herb Jones has got that. I mean, like, Herb has just been that guy for this team for years to take on those really difficult, perimeter assignments. And I agree that they are going to have to be like just fantastic defensively. I think there are questions of who are the Pelicans going to start. And I think DeJounte, Brandon Ingram, Zion, those are locks. You can talk about the other two positions. I just don't see a world where Willie Green, this is just my opinion, I don't really know. I don't see a world where Willie Green takes Herb Jones out of the starting lineup, coming off of an all defensive season, a season where he shot it above 40% from three. I just have a hard time seeing that. So that's four right there. If you want to start a traditional center, it's Daniel Tice. Maybe there will be some argument about like, do we just want to start small and, maybe we could save that, or I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot in the next few weeks. I think that'll be a talking point, but yeah, man, I'm excited to watch DeJounte and Herb specifically defensively. And like when you just talk about those four players together, and if you would throw in Tice, that's five. Like, yeah, there are concerns about the lack of outside shooting and the lack of 3-point shooting around Zion Williamson. Like, it's going to be a necessity for them to defend well and create turnovers and get out and run.
The other guy I think who benefits from this too, CJ McCollum benefits in a big way, I think, by being moved to the bench and having that role. We saw CJ have the most efficient offensive season of his career last year in accepting a new role as far as not handling the ball so much, being more of a catch and shoot guy. Well, to do that now as a second unit, I think CJ kind of wore down at the end of the year. You could see that his age, being one of the few over 30 guys on that team, and having not a lot of options behind him to play that combo guard role, I think it wore on him at the end of the year. Now to play him in that six-man role where you can see, oh, CJ's feeling it tonight. We can get him points in bunches, get him touches in bunches with that second unit, or occasionally run him with the starting unit as the game goes on. I think this is a big benefit in extending his time in New Orleans and also improving his value as a player. And maybe if there is a trade that has to come and he has to be involved, I think it will make him a better prospect for someone down the road.
Yeah, I think media day is September 30th. I can't wait for CJ to be asked, what are your thoughts on coming off the bench for this team, and to kind of see, does he have an appetite to do that, or does he kind of blanch at that idea of like, you want me to come off the bench after a season in which I was third in the NBA in 3-pointers made per game? Like, he had a really good year overall, like incredibly efficient, more of an off-ball role than we saw in New Orleans previously. Really high 3-point volume. Like, he did everything they need him to do, especially offensively. I mean, I thought he was, he almost maxed out his talent last year. Like, that was pretty close to the best version of CJ McCollum you're going to get. It was really good. And that's going to be a very interesting storyline. What is CJ's appetite to come off the bench? What are his thoughts on that? He's got 2 years left in the deal. It's a pretty big number, more than $30 million in each of those. I mean, look, it's a big number. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I don't have any sense of like where his head is at on that.
I think the hard thing for CJ, I think, is when we look at the list of contenders in the league, and that's for him, if you're going to leave New Orleans, it's for a contender. It's that there aren't a lot of teams that have a hole at his spot, amongst the elites. So and I don't think he wants to walk anywhere away from that 30+ million that he's owed in each of the next 2 seasons either. So, I mean, I think that as far as role goes, I think he can still get starters minutes as a reserve. With this team, I think the guy who I think is going to lose the biggest in this is Jose Alvarado, because I just don't see. And, honestly, I think it's the best thing for Jose's role to be limited, because he is a guy that fits certain situations and not all situations. He's limited by his lack of height and his lack of production in multiple areas. Jose really does 2 things well, as far as pushing the tempo and occasionally coming up, being a defensive gnat, so to speak. But Jose doesn't give you a lot of skills. I think for this he's the guy who's going to suffer minutes wise in that lead guard rotation more than anybody else.
Yeah, look, last year's team, I think that the Pelicans just arrived at a place where it's like, look, we've kind of got 3. I mean, I know Jordan Hawkins is 6'4", 6'5", but he's skinny. He's slight of frame. And I think they were at a place where it's like, look, we're going to play 2 of the 3 of CJ McCollum, Jose Alvarado, and Jordan Hawkins. And as that season progressed, they gave those minutes to Jose Alvarado. And Jose Alvarado has been a guy coming off the bench who just helps you win minutes when he's on the floor. I mean, playoff time, he was I think not very good at all last spring. He'll even tell you that. I think there are, questions he needs to answer come playoff time, but in the regular season, he's proven as a guy, as a bench guy who can help you win his minutes. And I think that's going to be fascinating to see if is he going to get any of them on a night-to-night basis with CJ potentially coming off the bench. I mean, I guess I would ask you, like, is Jordan Hawkins in the rotation in your mind? I mean,
I don't see it.
you got Jose not in there. Does that mean
Mhm.
you're factoring in Jordan in there or not in there?
No, I don't see a lot of minutes for Jordan either because I think the summer league for him was his audition to play as a lead guard. Like you said, he can't play 2 guard minutes with his slight frame at 6'4". He's not gonna be a presence defensively at that position, and for Willie, that's number 1. If you can't defend, you can't get on the floor. So if Jordan can't defend at the 2 spot, he has to play a lead guard role, and he did not look comfortable either shooting the ball really well in the summer league or creating for other people. So I think that not that he doesn't have talent, but I don't know if this is the team now based on what we've seen with the construction of this roster that's going to benefit him in the short term to find out what his ceiling is. You can't afford where the Pelicans are both financially, where they are roster wise, where they are positioned in this league right now. They can't afford to give him 15 minutes a night to figure out his role. So I don't see where Jordan, other than in situations where you have to have some shooting and everybody's off, that Jordan is really going to get many minutes this year.
Yeah, just my way too early prediction without, really talking to any coaches about any of this stuff. I think Jose Alvarado will get minutes. I just think he has that trust with Willie Green. But I agree. I'm looking at. I'm like, I think it's gonna be really hard for Jordan Hawkins to get minutes. I mean, if CJ and Trey are 2 guys coming off the bench, that's 7 guys. I mean, Eve Meese, maybe he plays sometimes, maybe he doesn't. That's 8. Um, Javonte Green, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who gets minutes. That's 9. I think generally it's going to be difficult for the Pelicans coaches to play all 3 of CJ McCollum, Jose Alvarado, and Jordan Hawkins and be as good as they want to be defensively. That was something we saw last year, and I would expect that to continue this year.
That kind of leads us into, we talk about fit for Trey Murphy. We'll talk about Brandon Ingram and his impact on it. But for Trey, if we're saying that Trey goes to the bench, if that's where he is because of, you're not sending Brandon to the bench, that's not going to happen. But if Trey's on the bench and we've seen what he does in his minutes and that he's earned more minutes and that he's also in a contract year and he's ready I think there are a lot of teams that are willing to throw the max at him should he become available at the end of this season. If you're Trey, you look at your role. Do you feel like you're going to get your 28 minutes a night? Are those legitimate things that you can think about? And then your position, do you have to start preparing to play more minutes at the 4? Because look, I mean, I got into a problem with people this summer. They kind of hammered on me because I said I don't view Zion Williamson as a 4. He doesn't play the 4 role defensively or offensively for this team. He attacks with the basketball when he's on offense. He doesn't really post up in those things. But we saw Trey kind of play in those games down the stretch where he was playing basically the 4 role and getting double figures in rebounds. He's got length. He plays bigger than he is. I think that he's going to have to play a lot of minutes near the basket for this team. But it's also, again, he wants his shots. Certainly, he's a guy who can give you 20 points per game if he's getting shots.
Yeah, I mean, Trey effectively was a starter 2 years ago, just because that was a year where Zion and Brandon missed so much time. I think Trey started, close to 65 games, and he looked really good in that role. My prediction today on August 29th would be that if everyone's healthy in opening night, Trey Murphy's a guy coming off the bench. I mean, he's already a stud bench player. I think one of the questions I have for this season is the Pelicans are already talking about, well, we want to play a lot of small and fast. Like, yeah, Daniel Tice is going to get minutes, but like we want to play a lot of lineups without a traditional center. We'll see how much that actually happens, but who's going to be guarding the other team center when you do that? Is it going to be Zion? Is it going to be Brandon Ingram? Is it going to be Trey Murphy? I mean, Trey Murphy likes to say all the time, I'm 6'10". And it's like, yeah, he's right there. He's very talented. But does that mean in these small ball lineups, like he's the guy who's going to have to be guarding other centers at times? Trey Murphy, who was 6'4" entering college or whatever, so that's something I'm going to be watching is like if they do, really want to like the small and fast Pelicans are a thing, who's going to be guarding the other team's fives? I mean, I guess it'll be Zion. I mean, he's not been a great defensive rebounder. He doesn't like doing that. Like he's been pretty open about the fact that he's like, I don't like when you guys put me on the block and post me up. And like, I don't think of myself as a five. He thinks of himself as like a supersized guard. So
Yeah,
who's gonna have to do that stuff?
yeah. I mean, my thing is like Zion is one of those players that I put in a category with like Allen Iverson and Steph Curry, in that they're not. I don't consider Steph a point guard. I don't think of AI as a point. They're basketball players, and they have this like exceptional skill set, and you have to figure out the roster fit around them. But if you try to pigeonhole them into that one position, if you just make them into a post defender or something like that, that's where Zion isn't going to excel. And I look at him as a guy who mentally is finally, it seems, getting to a really good place with his basketball career. You started to see that confidence surge with him towards the end of the season, and especially it kind of peaked at the wrong time, I guess, ultimately in the play-in game against the Lakers, where he's giving everything he's got in that game and almost dragging the Pelicans back into it. But you were seeing all the things you wanted to see out of him, and I think he comes back to this year. Physically, he's in great shape from what we've seen so far, where I think that maybe this is finally past beyond being a concern for him as far as his understanding of keeping himself in shape. But at the same time, you're asking him again after he just got comfortable in a role, so to speak, to make another adjustment. And that is something I think that bothers me about this franchise in general, is that it doesn't ever feel like from year to year you're stacking on anything. It always feels like, well, we're making another change in direction. And I think that that's hard when you have a lot of young players who are trying to find their place not only on their team but in the league, to keep shifting their roles and their understanding of their placement within the team hierarchy.
Yeah, I think one of my criticisms of the Pelicans since they won the 2019 lottery and got Zion Williamson, which any of the 30 teams they would have taken him back in 2019, is just they haven't put rosters that fit his skill set. And I think maybe there's been some hesitation at times because it's like, how reliable is this guy? And there's some merit to that argument, but it's like, we got to try it at some point. I mean, that was kind of the word from the team at the start of this offseason. It's like, okay, we've recognized Zion as the guy. It took 5 years for us to recognize this, but like, we're going to try to fit the pieces around him better. And I think they tried to do that. And, the Brandon Ingram thing has played out like it's played out, but there's just rarely been times where it's like, yeah, this roster makes a lot of sense around a guy who likes to have the ball in his hands and get to the rim and shoot 9 out of every 10 shots to the rim and needs a lot of outside shooting. Like I look at like Giannis Antetokounmpo as kind of a model. And there's a huge gulf between Giannis Antetokounmpo and Zion defensively in terms of availability. But like kind of look at the way they've built around Giannis. Like they made a point. I mean, they got a stretch five with Brook Lopez. They put, two-way players who can shoot around him. And I think the Pelicans, there's a lot of talent around Zion, but it's fair to wonder like how well does this stuff fit?
And I think nobody exemplifies that more than Brandon Ingram, who had a lot of, I guess, memorable moments, and has been, I guess, if we look at it in the sense of has he lived up to some of his potential? Yes, I think he's some of it. There are moments when Brandon Ingram has looked like an elite wing player in this league, but I think he took a giant step back last season with his production, with his quite frankly, his mental approach to the game and his willingness to adapt. It feels like that came to a head. That he and Willie Green ultimately don't see the way that he plays basketball the same way, or the way he should play basketball the same way. Now you go into this season where if they don't make a deal soon, you're going to open the season with him in contract limbo, enroll Limbo as well, because he is clearly not in the minds of any of these guys anymore. He's not the guy. It's Zion's team. Zion sees this. It is his team. The rest of these guys, DeJounte is clearly coming in to play with Zion Williamson. He views it that way. CJ compliments Zion Williamson. We know Trey and Herb, and the minutes that they get with Zion, they do a fantastic job with Zion Williamson. But all of them are much iffier fits with Brandon Ingram. Where does Brandon now fit in all of this? Because yes, he's a fine player in abstract, in isolation, but with this group, I just don't know how the chemistry, especially early on with everybody now, because these are people who need touches. They're all going to be trying to figure themselves out. And Brandon is a guy who likes to get himself into his own rhythm. It just feels like this is going to the early part of the season could be very difficult for the Pelicans.
Yeah, look, I mean, maybe there's a world where the Pelicans just have so much talent, they just win 50 games despite their fit, but I think anybody can see that this doesn't feel ideal from a fit perspective going into the season. DeJounte Murray likes to have the ball in his hands. Zion Williamson likes to have the ball in his hands. Brandon Ingram likes to have the ball in his hands. And I guess my question is, what is what is the ideal roster for Brandon Ingram look like in, an environment where you're going to be winning year after year after year? I mean, he early in his career, he played with LeBron and he was very young and it was not ideal, but LeBron decided quickly like, yeah, me and him don't fit. And he's played with Zion for a couple of years and the fit hasn't looked great at a lot of times. Brandon had time with Team USA last year where he played a lot of next to a lot of other talented guys and it just didn't go very well. I've seen, a lot of instances now where he is next to some talented guys and like the fit just doesn't look great. So I think it's on him to make it work. I just think it could be this awkward situation where it's like he's potentially playing for a new contract in a year where the Pelicans are going to ask him to be sacrificing. Those two things don't mix in my mind. Of like Brandon Ingram is on one hand, he wants to get a deal worth more than $50 million, but on the other hand, it's like, hey man, we need you to take fewer shots for us to win more. I'm interested to see how that plays out.
And the economics of this league just make it really difficult because I think other teams, like if you just took the Western Conference contenders and you said, where would Brandon Ingram make sense? Even non-contenders, like there just doesn't seem to be a natural fit for Brandon. And I think it's more so not just because of his game, but because he just seems so unwilling ultimately. And I think that, you talk about Team USA. I think that was the ultimate thing is that Steve Kerr asked him to play a different role and he couldn't do it. He just mentally could not get there for whatever reason, whether he didn't want to or he's just not capable of doing so. He could not do it. And we saw, I think, some of that pull and push when he came back and Zion had seized control of this team, with both its personality and its offense. There was just nights where you could clearly see that it's like, well, that shot's open, Brandon. Take that shot from three in the corner. He wouldn't take it, or just things that he just was unable to do. And I just, like you said, to come in and to have your financial future in a league that now with the aprons on the salary cap and all these things that de-incentivize teams for making bad financial decisions in their mind that you can't get out from under quickly. And Brandon's going in looking for a 5-year deal from somebody, 4 or 5 years at max contract, $50 million, $40+ million a year. I just don't know where that is, and the pressure to play for that kind of money. It just seems like that's a lot to put on his shoulders.
Yeah, and I think there is like a middle ground here where he could do an extension that's not the full max, where it's an extension where he would still could be traded, midseason. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I'm wondering if that's something him and the Pelicans could revisit before the start of the season. I think it's at least a possibility of like, okay, I'm gonna guarantee myself, some solid money. Maybe it's not what I wanted in my heart of hearts, and the Pelicans still have the option to be able to move off of him midseason. I have a really hard time seeing the Pelicans backing down from their stance of like, yeah, we're just going to max him again, because that would, if they do that, that would lock him into his contract for more than a year. That would mean he can't move off of him this season. I mean, I think the Pelicans want to have the option of being able to move him midseason.
Yeah, and that the Trey Murphy deal hangs over all this as well. And then you're also looking at the comparison where DeJounte Murray is under a very team-friendly contract with his 4 years and 114 million ahead of him. That's an extremely and his resume compared to Brandon Ingram's is what and what. They're both one-time All-Stars. They're both guys who have scored 20+ points per game in this league, who haven't won a lot individually. If you're putting them in comparison, if you're the Pelicans and you say, this is what we're paying DeJounte, who also gives us a presence on the defensive end, who can also be our primary ball handler, we think he's a fit and shoots more and makes more than 200 threes a season, it's hard to justify at all giving Brandon 40 plus million per season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think DeJounte and Brandon, they're pretty comparable players in terms of like production. I mean, I don't think it's outlandish to say like DeJounte's kind of been a lead guard version of Brandon Ingram so far in the NBA. I think they both made one All-Star game. I would have to double check this, but they believe they made it as injury replacements. So there's a lot of similarities there in terms of just like where they rank in the NBA hierarchy. Good, but not great players.
Um, when we talk about Trey again, before we move to the front court, do you think that Trey's contract situation does get resolved before the regular season? And if it doesn't, if he doesn't sign an extension of the regular season, how much does that impact Trey's relationship with the Pelicans?
Everything I've heard on this is there is still optimism something is going to get done. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's in the best interest of both sides to try and get something done right now. I mean, look, your best player is Zion Williamson. Trey Murphy fits like a glove next to him offensively. Like it just makes too much sense to try to pair those guys together for the next 3-5 years to me. Like I think when I look at a four of like DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion Williamson, if you're starting those four guys with, a center, like that's a basketball fit to me. That makes a lot of sense on both ends of the floor. I get that. I mean, I think the Pelicans should try to get something done. I think for Trey Murphy, it could be a hell of a payday. I think one of the interesting things to watch here too is they can sign him to a 5-year deal. Like the rules have changed pretty recently to where if you weren't maxing a guy coming off his rookie contract, it was a maximum of 4 years. They can lock him into a 5-year deal now. And like after this year, the NBA salary cap is going to go up 10% and 10% and 10% because of that massive $77 billion 11-year national TV deal that the NBA just signed. So like the cap is going to rise a lot over the next half decade. I would just try to lock Trey Murphy into whatever number it is right now for as many years as possible.
It's interesting though. We have not gotten to the point. This is really the first negotiation that David Griffin has had to do with a first round pick. Because Zion that was easy call. You were going to max him no matter what, unless he just didn't want to be here anymore. But for Trey, your only other first rounder that you've gotten to this situation with, Herb, you lucked out because he was a second round pick. You could kind of you got in on him early, and you were able to throw money at him while it was stuck at that second round price. But for Trey, Trey has actual leverage, and he knows that around the league he is valued, and he knows that in that building, certainly with the Pelicans, they value him. I think they view him as a star in this league. I don't know, I don't know if Trey's ceiling is superstar, but he certainly has star qualities. A guy who could be a 20+ point per game scorer, a guy who's going to shoot 40% from three, who could shoot 80+% from. He's a 40, 50, 90 candidate every year. And he also shows that he can rebound and defend at a very good level. And then we just saw, again, he led the NBA in turnover percentage last year. So he's doing the thing that for this team that doesn't have a lot of size, you cannot turn the ball over if you're going to run. You have to secure boards and be able to do those things. And he also he is not just a catch and shoot guy. He can finish around the basket. He can put the ball on the floor. So I think there's so many ways to expand his game that his value to the Pelicans, like you said, whatever you have to do to get this done, figure out the rest later. Figure it out later for the other parts. But knowing that you have Trey Murphy locked up for 4 to 5 years beyond this, I think is key for this team, for the security of this team, for the mentality of this team. I think it's a vital thing to get done.
Yeah, I think Trey Murphy's side understands too. He's a coveted player in the NBA. I mean, every NBA team needs a 6'10" guy who could shoot threes from 30 feet away, making him at a 40% clip and dunk all over you. I mean, he's really just he has the potential to be like an elite role player in this league, like star in his role. I mean, every team needs one of those guys, and I think his side definitely understands that. There's a lot of teams that want this guy and like this guy.
We move to the front court. Outside of Zion Williamson, you don't really have a power player in the front court. Daniel Tice, 6'8". they talk about his ability to space the floor, but he's only had 2 seasons in the league where he shot better than 33% from 3-point range. He's not really a deadly outside shooter. He's going to be a good screen guy, but he's also not a great rebounder. He's an effective one at 6'8", but not a great one. Misi showed a lot of potential during summer league. The things that we already knew, the length and the athleticism. Also, a little bit of an ability to put the ball on the ground, though offensively, he's not going to be asked to do much but roll and finish on second chances, the things that, quite frankly, Jackson Hayes was expected to do but could not do while he was here. And then Carlo Makovic, a guy who people have enjoyed watching in Summer League and have speculated about his potential, but he hasn't played a single minute of NBA basketball either, and he's going to have to learn as well. I think that the pressure, because the big situation won't get resolved anytime soon, I think this puts a lot of pressure on guys, in particular Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray, to be exceptional rebounders at their position. They're always been good rebounders, but I think you're going to have to have a lot of 8 plus rebound games for Herb and DeJounte this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Jonas Valanciunas, one thing he did at an elite level indisputably is defensive rebounding. Like Jonas Valanciunas has been one of the NBA's best defensive rebounders for basically a decade now, and you're not going to have that anymore. Zion has not seemed to really relish that part of the game. Brandon Ingram has not seemed to really relish that part of the game. Like it's definitely on those two guys. You got to have DeJounte Murray in there to help. He's actually been a good rebounder for his position, and you need Herb Jones too. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. Just like, do they get killed on a defensive glass out there without Jonas Valanciunas?
And that has been like one of the major problems for the Pelicans over the last 3 seasons under Willie Green are those second chance opportunities that they give to other teams and their lack of defensive rebounding outside of Jonas Valanciunas. So now you've completely eliminated that, and you don't even have the size there necessarily to just be a deterrent, which means your front guys, whether it's Brandon or Zion or whatever, that at the very least they have to be consistent at boxing out if they're not going to secure rebounds, which again is not something that they've been great at. I think second chance points are going to be a huge area of concern again for this team, especially when we look at it. Just seems like the West got bigger. Everybody is huge compared to this team. When you're just in the division, Memphis has Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey now. So they have a monstrous front court at times. We know what San Antonio has with Wembanyama, and they have length on their court. The Rockets seem to have so many guys who are big at their position, let alone in the front court where they have multiple centers who can play. This team, it's such a big disadvantage for the Pelicans, where it looks like the league is getting bigger again. That small ball is going out of fashion. And we've seen the Pelicans zig where everybody else was zagging, but they went big with DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis and tried to counter the league when it was playing a little smaller. But now to go very small when you're playing against teams on a night-to-night basis that have gotten much bigger, I'm worried about that.
I think you left out the biggest guy, Victor Wembanyama. The 7'5" guy you're going to have to play 4 times a year. And look, I think you bring up a good point. You're going small and fast. That's what they're talking about right now at a time when there are a lot of good bigs in the league now. I mean, this is a different situation than 5, 7, 10 years ago. There are talented bigs, especially in the Western Conference, like Jokic. I mean, Tyson, Yves Misi on Jokic, okay. I mean, Wembanyama 4 times a year. Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey together. Going to be tough to score on them inside. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're zigging when everyone else has zagged, and we'll see how it works out. I mean, nobody knows what to make of this team. It's like you read stuff around the NBA, and it's like, well, I like the DeJounte Murray move, and they've got a lot of good players, but how is this actually going to work? I mean, it feels like everyone's kind of got the same take on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's so much talent, but it's all at the same places. It seems very, you've got too much of the same thing, and I think that was the problem last year in a lot of cases where we thought, yeah, you're stacked in the wings, you got plenty of wings,
Yeah.
but you didn't have any lead guards, and which has been the problem for the Pelicans. Well, you got a lead guard now, and you're stacked on the wings, but your front court is so small. I mean, this is just an incredibly short team when it comes to length. And, like you said, with Denver, not only Jokic, but Aaron Gordon has had his way with this team. We look at the Orlando Magic, which have been in the Eastern Conference, have been a nemesis to the Pelicans for years now. They have incredible length across the front court, and you see them ascending in the league. The Sixers still have Embiid in that front court. The Knicks have gotten longer and bigger, and they'll get Mitchell Robinson back. So even in you look at the Eastern Conference, the Celtics still have a lot of length with Porzingis and Horford and these guys who are still on that roster. Your elite teams in this league do the thing that the Pelicans don't do well.
Yeah, and Oklahoma City, one of the smartest, most well-run teams in the NBA. They already had an elite five on last year's team, and Chet Holmgren is more of a stretch five. They're going to be able to deploy him as a stretch five, but they're not going to have to now. They went out and signed Isaiah Hartenstein. I mean, to me, they made the best moves this offseason, getting Alex Caruso for a super low price. How did they not even give a pick for Caruso? Pretty nuts. And Hartenstein, like they are loaded, and they're going to be able to put two bigs out there at the same time. To your point about the Pelicans, I think the Ringer did something where they talked to Calvin Booth, who's the GM of the Nuggets, and one of his quotes in that article about a year ago was, "Overlap is a silent killer," and that has always stuck with me. I think the 24-25 Pelicans are going to be a good test case of how true that is, because there is a lot of overlap on this roster.
Right. It keeps popping in. Like you think about Minnesota, they've got Towns and Gobert, and you go. I mean, it's just as you go down the list, everybody's got at least one legitimate starting big. I mean, even you look at Houston, they can switch you up with Şengün and then go Steven Adams or Jabari Smith. Whatever they want to do up front, they have a different type of player to do, and it's going to be a really difficult thing for Willie Green to deal with. Speaking of Willie Green, a guy who's won more games each and every season as a head coach. Does Willie A get enough credit? But at the same time, has he been given the right roster and right staff to maximize what this team can do and really put it in a position to finally get past eighth? Like no matter what, you've improved in wins every year, and you can't get past 8.
Yeah, I think Willie Green's time in New Orleans it's been interesting to see how he is perceived, because I think in the beginning, and I participated in this, he probably got a little bit too much credit. It's like, okay, maybe we went a little nuts. I mean, that was an inspiring speech before the fourth quarter against the Clippers, but maybe we overlooked that, he's pretty inexperienced. He is. He's in his early 40s. He hasn't been coaching. He hasn't got as many reps as Mark Daigneault in Oklahoma City. But at the same time, I felt like last year people were killing him a little bit too much. I mean, look, he came to the Pelicans at a time when I think people were just turning down that job. They were looking at it like, that place is an absolute mess, and I want no part of it. And Willie Green came here, and I think was a big part of the culture turning around. And I think overall, he's done a pretty nice job, and he's got to keep getting better. And I think coaching offense is one of those areas. I think the critique of he's not the most creative offensive coach at times, there's legitimacy to that. But this is a weird roster, and he's got his work cut out for him. It's like, I think it was Larry Bird who said, I just like to change my head coach every 4 years. I think there are just some GMs in the NBA who okay, NBA coach, unless they're Eric Spoelstra, they just have a shelf life. I mean, Willie Green he's got his work cut out for him this year. These puzzle pieces don't fit together seamlessly.
No, and I guess that's also a reflection for David Griffin, who has kind of seen the world shift for him. I mean, no more Trajan Langdon there now in the front office. In the situation again where 5 years in with your number one pick, you have not won a playoff series. You haven't gotten higher than the 8th seed in the Western Conference. The West is going through its second shift at the top, where you came in at the tail end of the Warriors era, and now it's this kind of just free for all, where there are a number of teams from year to year that feel like they can make a run in the Western Conference. It's maybe more competitive than it's ever been. But there has to be, at this point, like you said, with the money that's coming in, with the salary cap expanding over the next few years, there has to be a lot of pressure at some point from Gail Benson on her side for this investment to start paying off in a big way. One playoff series isn't enough for her. They've got to get some of those national TV dollars too. They want that this team to have some notoriety throughout the Gulf Coast. And there are ways that they're doing that on the franchise side. But the on-court product, with all the investments that have been made for this franchise, the practice facility, all these things that they've done, the coaching staff, paying for everything that they paid for, getting a bunch of 8 seeds and getting swept in the first round isn't enough.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, because it very well could be the Pelicans are a play-in tournament team again, and if you're in the play-in tournament, it can be a crapshoot. I mean, this year will tell me, is it enough? I mean, because I don't know. I mean, like I wasn't here for it, but the Dell Demps tenure ran a long time, probably longer than people would have liked to see. I mean, is it different now where if you're just kind of in the middle in, a very difficult Western Conference, we should say that is enough? I don't know the answer. And I mean, how this year goes could help me answer that question.
What did the loss of Trajan Langdon mean to the front office? Because I think that there's a lot of conversation amongst fans about what Trajan's value was, and I think again, it's easy to overestimate or underestimate what someone's role is from the outside. What did the Pelicans really lose in your estimation with Trajan going to Detroit?
Yeah, I think Trajan participated heavily in the draft, heavily involved in scouting. I mean, he's worked in the NBA for more than 10 years now. I think he got his start as a scout with the San Antonio Spurs, so well connected. I think he just helped with intel of figuring out like, okay, do we really know this player we're going to trade for, that kind of thing. But Bryson Graham, who got elevated into Trajan's old job, I think also has been heavily involved in the scouting and draft side, and as a guy like people think is a really sharp talent evaluator. He's a guy who gets a lot of the credit from people I've talked to for the Trey Murphy selection at 17. That's one of the single best moves this front office has made in the last 5 years of getting a guy like that in the middle of the first round. So I think it could be significant, but they feel really confident in Bryson Graham. The other thing is, Trajan took like people with him. Michael Blackstone went with him. I mean, Michael Blackstone was one of the guys that David Griffin relied on the most for like contract negotiations, just overall strategy. So I honestly think that like they knew Trajan Langley wanted to be a number one. And like he was looking for a while. He was interviewing for like he got close and didn't get a couple jobs. So they expected like, okay, he got one, he's out the door. Like they're probably preparing for it for a while. I think like when he took Michael Blackstone with him, that definitely surprised like Griff, and people in the front office like, oh, okay. So there is a talent drain. I think the Pelicans can survive it.
Who's the competing voice with Griffin? Who's the one who kind of gives him like it's can stand up and say, I don't agree with that move, and it means something.
That's a good question. I mean, Willie Green, I think that David Griffin and Willie Green have differences of opinion on how to deploy the roster. And I think like one of those, the big ones that people in the fan base probably already understand is Willie Green plays the defensive minded guys over more offensively inclined players. And I don't know, like if Griff was the coach, if he would always do that. Um, from what I can tell, I think Griff pretty much lets Willie coach the team. Like he has input, but it's like, look, I get the players and you coach the team and make the personnel decisions. Like I think there's a pretty heavy separation there. So I guess that's one guy I would say in the front office. I don't think I know enough um to really tell you, but like, yeah, I mean, I think Griff and Willie do different things. They're not like not on the same page, but they definitely disagree sometimes.
Right, and that's what I mean, because I think in any office situation, you want to have some creative tension. Somebody who sees something a little differently, not the opposite, not someone who goes against your vision, but sees who can say, maybe I wouldn't do that. And I think I think we all view Trajan as somebody who had enough weight that if he saw something that he really didn't like or something that he could say to Griff, hey, maybe we want to step back from that decision for a minute. But now he kind of wonder with this front office, the way it's aligned and new people coming in and where and Willie being a guy who's only got 3 years in his pocket as a head coach, do you really have the gravitas to walk into the front office and say something? And I'm not saying that to be a negative. I'm just saying like to have an honest discussion with Griffin, maybe show him something that he's not thinking of, so that if Griffin's voice gets augmented in this new dynamic, is there a vacuum behind him, kind of? And I don't think that necessarily a negative. You can have absolute power and do really well. We've seen it in sports, but also at the same time, I think that there's just I think that there's always been an idea for a lot of fans, in particular, that Langdon was that the other guy, that he wasn't a subservient necessarily, that he had not equal standing with Griffin, but he was right there as far as credibility went in this league.
He was paid well. I know that. I know he was
Yeah.
like, one of the highest paid number twos in the NBA before he went on to become the top executive in Detroit. Um, that is one thing that Griff does. He gets his people paid and like salute. I think they've been able to bring talented people here. So that's cool. He's definitely, I think, been able to loosen up the purse strings with ownership more than Dell Demps did.
Oh, absolutely. Dell couldn't get a quarter if he wanted to. There was no money being spent during those years. Lastly, before we wrap this up, Christian, I think we're all just we're seeing again where the Pelicans are going to meet together as a group and do some preseason. The last time they did that, they actually had a decent season. And the big effort was to get everybody together with Drew Holiday and everything and work out in the offseason. Um, but I think the fan base is kind of past the point where vibes matter. Like we've seen this team loves each other. We've heard all that for 5 years. We've heard how much they get along and all these things. I don't know how much it really matters for them to get together in the preseason or the offseason as a group without the coaching staff before training camp, because none of them are prepared for what they're going to do offensively. None of them are prepared for the rotation minutes. None of them are prepared for those kinds of things. And it's fine to try to get on the same page, but I think the rubber is really going to hit the road when guys start seeing what the minutes distribution looks like for this team. And I look at the early schedule, those first 10 games, and it's the NBA game, a pretty balanced schedule with some good opponents and some not so good opponents, teams with some really good bigs and some with really good perimeter players. But I think the Pelicans have shown that their first 10 games are a real good indicator of how their season is going to go. Willie Green's been good at getting you out of the gate over the last 3 years, 2-0 last year, 2-0 the year before. But those last 5 or 6 games in each of the first 10 have gone pretty poorly. And I think that they're going to be faced with a big challenge again this year. The one thing I worry about in that first 10 is guys losing or letting go of the rope early and saying, because of all these competing interests, contracts, minutes, points, shot attempts, all these things, I worry about that start and how important and critical it's going to be over the course of the season. Do you think that this team is really set up to get out of the gates well, or do you think it could be a struggle up until maybe we get to around the Christmas time?
Oh man. There's so much we don't know. I mean, we don't even know if they're going to start Daniel Tice or just decide to start small right off the bat. I mean, I can't wait for Willie Green to duck all of those questions I beat him. Like, I'm not committing to any of this on September 30th. I'm just not going to answer any of this stuff. I mean, there's so much I don't know. I think that to me, the schedule looks pretty favorable at the beginning of the year. I mean, you're in Portland, 2 of the first 3 games. I know you'd rather face Portland like in January, February, and they're outright tanking. But come on. I mean, win both of those games. They're going to have to sacrifice. Like, that's going to be, one of the themes of the season. Like, sacrifice is necessary. I mean, I'm sorry, Brandon Ingram. Like, we're going to need you to take catch and shoot threes. We're going to need you to defend and rebound. I don't know if that'll lead to the payday you want or not. Maybe they can sell them on, if you just win, the money takes care of itself. I mean, maybe they could sell them on that. But there's going to need to be sacrifice from Ingram and a lot of people too. I don't know enough right now to like have any strong takes. Like, what is their starting 5 even going to be?
Yeah. But doesn't it feel like this is where we are at the start of every season with this team? That there are just so many unanswered questions that you can't really formulate a strong opinion about them. I think this is basically a repeat in different ways of our conversation every year for the last 5 years. It's like, man, they've got talent. If everything goes right, they could be good. But there's some major fissures when you look at the landscape for this team. And that's every year. It's not where you say, if we're healthy. No, there's 4 or 5 things that you're looking at every season with this team besides health that just you can't answer.
Yeah, I felt like going into last season, like my take at the time was they have everything they need to be good. They just actually have to do it, and they did. Their best players were available for the most part. It was just a pretty, professional regular season from everybody. It was like this is just good, solid work for the most part. Zion got his act together after the in-season tournament, and they were one win away from 50, which around here is a really good season. Like I look at them right now, and I'm like, I like this team, but they're, I think fifth or sixth is probably a best case scenario. And like the most likely scenario is you're a play-in team once again. But this roster is going to have to change too. I mean, they're over the luxury tax line right now. The teams that aren't taxpayer teams this year are going to get an $18 million check at the end of the year. I'm going to assume the Pelicans won in on that. I'm going to assume that they're going to end the season below the tax line. The Ingram thing is hanging over everything. Like at least with last year, it was like, okay, the roster that we started the season with, I feel reasonably confident that this roster won't change that much. I think the difference is this year. I mean, there's a really good chance this roster looks dramatically different at the
It
end of
has
this
to
season.
change. It has to change this year. Last year, like, yeah, you knew that there were some game style of play problems. Like you didn't really have a point guard, and you wished you could protect the rim better, but your roster was pretty much set. Yeah, but this year you feel like, man, there are 4 or 5 guys who you look left and you look right, and they may not be there at the All-Star break. And like, but the question is which one of those are that core? And I think everybody would identify the 4 that you talked about as the core: Herb, Trey, DeJounte, and Zion. If you're going to build forward, that has to be the 4. You got 3 homegrown products in that set who are all still relatively very young players. I think what Herb's the oldest, at about to turn 20, 25. Herb's 25 and the oldest in the group, but the rest of that group is relatively young. I think you have to start looking for it because Brandon is in year 9, right? Year 8 or 9, and CJ obviously on the back half of his career. They can't be around for a buildup. They're just, if you're going to think you're going to build up with Brandon, when I think at year 8, 9 in this league, you are who you are. I mean, there's not a lot of change for players at that point in their role. They may be able to modify some things, but you are who you are. And I think he views himself as the number 1 player. He's never going to be that again in New Orleans as long as Zion Williamson is healthy.
Yeah, look, there's a clear like hierarchy going into the season, and Zion is at the top of the hierarchy. He just is. He's the most talented player on the team, and DeJounte Murray said it. Zion Williamson is our superstar.
Absolutely. Christian, thank you so much. Tell everybody how they can keep up with you and your podcast as well. And we will talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me on. You can read my stuff at nold.com. I should have a not that significant, but a Smoothie King Center update over the weekend. And then you could find my podcast at From the Wing on all platforms.
Thank you so much again, my friend. I appreciate you